I mean, the Downs is pagan, right? It just is. It's a place you can commune with what we call nature, but it's not natural. None of this is natural. You know, I mean, this has been shaped by human, it's not natural in the way that people usually mean, in that it's outside the realm of the human. But none of that's true, right? Because this has been shaped entirely over 5,000 years of human use. It's a tool, basically. This set of cliffs is a tool.
So we're in a cul-de-sac.
We're in a bit of a cul-de-sac. We're cut through this little children's playground up here.
You sure this is where it starts?
Anyway, when we get through here, see the sign. And you say when we walk over the bridge that goes over the M3, which is quite a new road, really.
Over there, that green sort of triangular field like that was a valley, a dry valley, and that's been filled up with part of Twyford Down.
So a lot of the chaining of people to diggers and that kind of thing was taking place
during that cutting, yes. I'm Chris Gillam. I was here on top of Twyford Down in the early 1990s trying to prevent this motorway going through this piece of ancient downland. In Africa, where you have like a drover's path where they might drive goats down a slope, they erode the surface of the ground, then it rains and the broken ground just washes away, and then that's the way the goats will go the next time, and so it just goes deeper and deeper, just keeps eroding away. And when they used to drive the cattle off, presumably along the whole spine of the downs and come into the market at Winchester, they would just descend this slope towards Winchester, and gradually the cattle would find these paths getting deeper and deeper. And presumably when they stopped being used as drovers' roads, perhaps 150 years ago or something like that, then they've grassed over. So they're left as grass, and the sort of erosion process has stopped. But down there where the road is, they got deeper and deeper. I just remember being around the campfire somewhere. When I say here, it was further down, but they were camped on one of the ridges. They didn't camp in the hollows. They camped on the ridges. They had a campfire there, and they were sort of idly talking about tribes, New Age. When New Age we ought to have a tribe, and just said, well, why shouldn't we be the Dongas tribe? So, and then it stuck, and then the people who belonged to the Dongas tribe were individually became Dongas. There's the Dongas, they're the respectable Winchester who fought the initial campaign. There's people like me who sort of in both camps just stayed as Winchester, but we thought we ought to support the direct action and do a little bit of it ourselves. And then there were a lot of environmentalists who came from all over. Some of them were from extreme the more extreme environmental groups from Earth First, particularly from Brighton, and then there were a lot of other committed environmentalists who would be on the sort of, if you like, the more radical side of Friends of the Earth.
What are you doing there, Chris?
I'm just going to allow Margaret Thatcher's name is on that stone as one of the villains, so I'm just a little wreath to her, which suggests she might now know better. Silly gesture, really. A lot of Twyford Down was about gestures.
What does it say
On this,
Yeah.
it just says, Margaret Thatcher, does she now understand what she did here? So, I don't know. I just remember somebody saying that the worst punishment of hell would be to understand what you did when you were alive. And know there was nothing more you could do about it.
What does this walk mean for you then, Bill?
It's a big question.
I mean, what's your motivation?
I guess there are lots of reasons. Some of them personal, some of them academic. I mean, it's I grew up in Lewis and in Brighton, so I've always been surrounded by the South Downs, and it's a landscape I have a lot of fondness for, and I've always wanted to walk the length of the South Downs Way. I also like journeys, and I like the kind of narrative of that, and the kind of romance of it, and the connection that it has to storytelling. And I also really like walking as a format for talking with people, and whenever I've done things in the past with that, it's always been really nice and can form connections with people who you've never met before, or you would never normally meet. I think it can really bring people together to talk about stuff. And then in relation to suicide, I guess I'm interested in any subject that's difficult or taboo, and there's a kind of nerdy side of it that's really enjoyed researching it and thinking about it from all sorts of different angles. But then there's a very personal side of it as well, in which there have been times in my life when suicide has almost seemed like a comforting option, a way out, a kind of, I found myself in a state of mind where I felt that if what I was doing doesn't work out, then I could kill myself and that would be okay. And it's a weird thing to say, but that I found that strangely comforting at times. How about you?
Well, I like walking the downs. I like walking. I think it's a nice space for thinking, or not thinking, putting perspective on things, It's a nice natural pace and speed to experience the world around you. Quite physical, grounding, left, right. Yeah, so I suppose for me, when I done this walk before, and I left from Brighton where I was living at the time, and walked to Winchester where I used to study, I was sort of getting over a bit of a heartbreak, and somehow in my head it seemed, I don't know, I suppose I am a bit of a romantic, but it seemed like a way of walking back to Winchester where I'd met my ex-girlfriend. It was this sort of way of going back there. I don't know why I wanted to do that. I think I wanted to just go back and sort of own it again. Do you know what I mean? Sort of have a new memory of Winchester.
Did it work?
I think it did to a certain degree. I don't think it was a sort of. I don't think it was necessarily the arriving in Winchester. I think it was the process of the walk itself. You know, they can be transforming, can't they? It's transformation. So I suppose the last time I did it, it was more of a personal journey, and it allowed me to sort of think about whatever issues and how I'd been feeling at the time. And I've always been. I think I've got quite a strong will to live. You know, I've not really ever had.
Are you a fighter?
I'm not. Yeah, I like to think so. But I don't think I've not really had many moments where I've seriously, considered suicide. Do you know what I mean? I've never really had it. The closest I came was at that particular time when I was, I felt like I just sort of, it was bereavement, and loss. And it's a painful experience, and I just needed to do something to. I needed to act in some way, I couldn't just sort of sit there and feel, just lay around or sit around feeling it. It was like, look, I should do something about this. So that's what I come up with.
Wow, what a view.
Yeah, that's right. This is the highest point for all the way around.
Yeah. Okay. So where's Alex? Where's our
Well, let's
archaeologist?
stand at the highest point.
All around these fields here, you can't see it unfortunately, but in using crop mark aerial photographs, they're what we call Celtic field systems all the way around here, which are thought to be Iron Age, if not maybe late Bronze Age. But yeah, so they were farming all the way around here. There's evidence of it, But what I find really interesting is in the Iron Age generally, there's no respect. The whole kind of ancestral respect thing that you get from the Bronze Age and the Neolithic, if you will, it gets thrown out generally in the Iron Age. They're knocking down barrows, they're ploughing over them. Here they're not. They've left them here. They've left them really, really intact, and here as well. So it's kind of interesting why. Why did they do that? Maybe there was still that little vestige of this place was important, it was sacred in some way, even in the Iron Age, And that's what I like to think. That they didn't, and even the Neolithic barrow there, they left that alone. And there's old Iron Age ploughing all the way through that, and they left it alone. So, where in another case, like I said, it just gets knocked out. They take it out, but here they didn't. So, still thinking it's sacred up here. But so again, it kind of shows that, like, as far as kind of attitudes towards death and things like that, it's it's not that dissimilar from our own when you think about it. You're still kind of like, you're still caring about your people that came before you. We have gravestones in churches and stuff. Maybe this is exactly the same thing happening here, but instead of gravestones, it's great big mounds. The interesting thing is it changes. I mean, towards the late Bronze Age, people stop building these big mounds. They start doing cremation burials where they're burning the bodies and put them in these little jars and then kind of burying these jars in the ground in these urn fields or singular burials. But you still get them buried in these mounds. In earlier mounds, they still take their urn and bury it in these mounds from say 1,500 years ago. So there's still this, only in certain places, and if we could travel back in time and stop those antiquarians, I'll bet you money that there were urns buried in these. Bet you money of it.
Is there anything that archaeology can tell us about like ancient people's attitudes to suicide? We've kind of talked about like kind of death in general, but
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Not so much in the prehistoric period, but if you go later on to Roman, a bit in the Roman, and then into the Saxon, and then into the medieval, is that you get things which is called deviant burials, where what you get is that in the Roman Saxon period, it will be people who are thought to commit suicide. You get them either buried at crossroads, so it's like way away from everyone else. But there's sometimes you get them with stones placed over them, or the heads taken off and placed somewhere else. Because basically there's this fear, we surmise, that if you die unnaturally, you'll come back to life. It's kind of where vampire belief probably comes from, something along zombies kind of thing, that you come back to life and that you kind of wander back and you terrorise your living relatives. So basically you bury them way away, cut their head off so they can't tell where they're going. When they wake up, they're like, where's my head? I don't know where it is. And also put big stones on them so they can't lift the stones up. Sort of like about 5 or 6 miles that way, there's a series of Bronze Age barrows like these in a wood. You can't see them unfortunately, there's like a barbed wire fence there, but they're called the Devil's Jumps. So, because presumably there was some some tale about the devil having a jumping competition. An interesting thing in these stories, the devil always loses because he's a fool, he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's doing, you see. So that's a bit of a Christian influence there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just interested in the way that people go around. They see these lumps, these mounds in the landscape, and they can't explain them because archaeology doesn't come along as a science until only about 100 years ago. So I think, we don't know what they are. Right, what could have done that? Well, a god, a giant, a monster. That must have happened. This has happened, So make up these stories, and I'm interested that it's still going on now. Even now, it's still going on. Like the pagan beliefs. It's I think it's just like a way that humans experience the landscape.
Well, I suppose that sort of all connects to this project again, because we're going to Beachy Head, obviously that's at the end of the South Downs.
Yeah.
And we're sort of looking at that as this being this sort of notorious suicide spot.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of intrigued as to sort of why Beachy Head.
Why do they pick it?
people from all over the world, don't they?
They travel from all over to sort of Dover. We have the White Cliffs of Dover. It seems to be that particular spot's become synonymous with suicide.
This is it again. Maybe it's because everyone, people started doing it because it's a very high up place to do it, and then the stories spread, and then it just becomes a life of its own. That this is where you go to do it, and it's again exactly. It's about it's got natural landscape features and the way the landscape is used, isn't it? In different ways. It's a slightly morbid way, but again, this is it, there's people utilising the landscape. It's not just about fields and mining, stuff out of it like chalk or metals or whatever. It's about how people religiously interact with the landscape, which I find very, very interesting.
in all of these cases, Louis, the family come and choose the plot. When I meet a family, I bring them down here, I explain our ethos, I explain how things can be if they want it to be, and I allow them to wander around and see what feels right. Some people prefer to be up in the open, some people prefer to be sort of in the middle here in amongst the trees, and in the case of this gentleman down here, his wife and children came down. They loved the aspect of looking over the sheep field there, which is an organic sheep field, I have to say, and which is why they're right down in the corner here, because they will be coming frequently in the future. I mean, they're a very young family, and you know, that's why a lot of people choose this site, because they want somewhere nice to visit. The whole point of the site is so that it will return to a native woodland. I'm very strict about what goes on down there. You'll see no shrineage, there are no headstones. There are memorials by means of habitat boxes and a few benches scattered around. But the whole point is the woodland in itself, in its entirety, is the memorial to the people that are there. And all the species that we replant are native, not just to the UK, but native to the South Downs. So in a few years' time, what you'll get down there is a semi-native woodland. I've had last year, in 1 week I had two 20-year-olds and a 29-year-old all in the same week. One walked into the sea, took a load of pills and walked into the sea. No one's quite sure whether that was deliberate or he was just partying. We'll never know. A young fella that went and stuck his head on the railway track just north of Winchester, 20 years old.
And is there still a taboo around it, you think?
Of course it is. How does the family think?
Yeah.
That I wasn't there to help. He couldn't come to us for help.
Yeah.
It's the worst. It's the worst thing. And I am always absolutely astonished and amazed at the stoicism of the British public. I'm at funerals where I'm weeping, for God's sakes, and the family are there just holding it all in, and particularly when it's a suicide, I can't even begin to imagine what the parents are going through, what the partners are going through. I've got a fella, he comes regularly now, his wife drove onto the railway tracks over in Chichester, his wife. You know, how do you talk to a guy like that? How do you console someone like that? I mean, what does it say about you? I just can't even get my head around it at all. Quite a lot of the cases here, I just can't get my head around, I'm afraid. I have to meet terminally ill people and bring them down here. I have to meet people that are obviously recently bereft, and I have to engage with them. That's not easy for me. I mean, I'm not trained in this. So the way I get through it, and I'll be perfectly honest, the way I get myself through it is by saying, oh, look at the wonderful primroses, and then we've got a badger set over there, and oh, look, there's a red kite up there, and you can plant wild flowers, and oh, look at the butterflies over there. And that's how I get through it, by trying to infuse my own enthusiasm for what we're doing, try and get that across, and try and get them to take something positive out of it. And in this case, by feeding these primroses and feeding these trees and indirectly feeding the wildlife, that is the positive experience. And being in a beautiful place. And I can't offer any people anything other than that, I'm afraid. One week, a few years ago, within 2 days, within 48 hours, I buried a baby which was, I think, 9 days old. And then the next day, a lady who was 101. Yeah, I couldn't get my head around that. I remember standing at that second funeral, and I just could not get my head around the 100 years between these people and how unfair it was. Well, I don't know. I still can't get my head around it. We meet all types of people here. You were talking about attitudes towards death. There are as many attitudes towards death as there are people. You don't even get two partners agreeing. I meet so many people, and it's usually the case that she wants burial he wants cremation. Well, we don't take ashes here. So they have to sort that out between themselves. But even brothers and sisters, even people that have been married for 60 years, have completely different attitudes towards the death thing. It's very interesting. Charlie here, the reason Charlie's with me is because I buried his wife here 5 years ago. He's been with me ever since. His attitude is he doesn't want a coffin, he doesn't want any nonsense. He's asked me specifically if let's hope it's not me that does it. He's asked me specifically, he wants to be wrapped in a shroud, put on the side of the plot and kicked in. That's what he wants. I get a lot of that sort of thing. I get a lot of people that come say, oh, just stick me in a cardboard box and chuck me in the woods somewhere, which is what we do. We don't chuck people anywhere, but we use a lot of cardboard coffins nowadays. Very popular.
Right, I'm Paul. I'm trained to be a person-centred counsellor, and I'm in the first year. But what I'm going to do today is talk to you guys to try and get you less in your heads and more into your feelings. It's not going to be a therapy session because there are rules around that, but I'm basically going to use counselling skills just to try and get you more in touch with your feelings around the issues of suicide and what it means to you.
I didn't really feel like I understood depression or a kind of suicidal impulse until I was maybe in my mid-20s. Like I had a lot of friends who suffered from depression and girlfriends and things like that, but I found it quite hard to relate to. And then I suddenly, I don't know, suddenly in my mid-20s I had this period where I just really, I felt very low, and I felt like a kind of a failure in many ways. And sort of ever since then, I haven't really felt that far from depression. I always kind of feel that it's there somewhere.
So until you were in your mid-20s, it had always been something for other people, but then you had a personal experience of it.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I'm not sure really where it came from. I think at that point, I think it was about, I suddenly started, you know, when you're younger and you're kind of just moving from one thing that you're expected to do to the next, and maybe you don't think about very much beyond that, and then all of a sudden you're kind of out in the world, and I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. And
should we see this? Ready? Yeah. Cool. Okay. Right, we've got about 50 minutes to over to you.
Okay, so I've been thinking about my feelings towards how I feel about suicide, and I was sort of explaining to Louis before about when I'd done this walk before, and the reasons behind why I did that was when I'd sort of split up with my ex-girlfriend.
Yep.
And felt like I needed to do something, but it was done. I suppose as a sort of just doing something proactive, as a sort of slight transformation, going back to the beginning again and sort of starting. Anyway,
so where you sort of significant as where you met her.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought, well, I might as well. I'm just going to walk there. I've always wanted to do it, and it was while I was walking, and I was feeling pretty low at the time. Never felt like that before, and it was a real shock. And I think the shock of feeling that low was also...
You were shocked by how low you actually felt.
Yeah. And I think it took me a lot longer well, it took me quite a while to sort of get back again, I think, because I'd sort of shocked myself, and then that shock had given me another shock, if you know what I mean. And
so like in the second layer of...
It had knocked me on, yeah. And then I suppose that's where you sort of feel like you spiral out of control a little bit. And control's an interesting...
So that's what you felt?
Yeah.
You felt you spiraled out of control?
Yeah, like, of, you know, emotionally, moods and feelings, and my thoughts I wasn't really in control of. And that was the closest that I've come to sort of feeling suicidal, but I've never really dealt with them thoughts in a serious way. You know, I've never thought about...
With suicidal thoughts?
Yeah.
When you say you haven't dealt with them?
I've never had them.
Okay.
I've never felt like I wanted to end in my life.
I mean, you sound very certain that's just there.
Yeah. I've thought about it. You know, when you sort of think about, I don't know, you go adolescent years and stuff, and you sort of think how easy it would be, and the fragility of being alive. You think all I've got to do is walk in front of that car, or you know, jump off of there.
So you've thought about it, but there's always been a distance between the thinking and you actually doing it.
Yeah.
You're using the word think a lot.
Uh-huh.
I noticed that, but I'm kind of trying to get more to the underlying feelings for you, to understand what that is for you. Conscious that we're staying in your head a lot.
Okay.
Because I've said that I wasn't picking up much emotion, that has actually struck you a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the bit I don't like. See, this is the bit. It's that bit of, you know, that it's very heady.
So what's that done? What has that done in the last 4 minutes that wasn't happening before?
Made me feel like you know, like a bit incapable.
Hi. There's more people out today.
Yeah.
That's because it's amazing.
Your granddad's first wife?
Yeah.
She committed suicide?
At Beachy Head, yeah.
Right. Wow.
And survived. And we can't figure out how that's even possible. I mean, you've been there. How could you do that? Unless they named it, unless they generically called a huge swath of
Beachy Head,
of the south coast, Beachy Head, and it was a much shorter area. Strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is an amazing day. I'm so psyched. Thanks for letting me tag along.
Oh, no pleasure. Oh.
You know, are you familiar with Doreen Valiente, the Brighton witch? So she was one of the real leading lights of the Gardnerian, I think, Wicca school, the real proper 20th century establishment of Wicca as that guy Ronald Hutton says, Britain's only indigenous religion. But Doreen Valiente lived, well, all around here, but I think most of her life she lived in Brighton. And she claimed, well, now I'm going to misremember, but she basically led me to believe in her writings that there was a coven based at Well, so a lot of these Wicca ideas fall back onto this really sort of belabored attempts at authenticating themselves via some kind of link to the old ways, when in fact, I think historically there's very little evidence that there ever was a sort of witch religion, as opposed to just a group of folk beliefs that some women held on to. But one theory posited through Valiente's writings was that the Chanctonbury Ring Coven, which I'm not sure ever even existed, but that there was a coven at Chanctonbury that had been meeting since the 16th century or something, and at her time of writing in the early 20th century was still meeting regularly, and et cetera, et cetera. So to me, that's Downes' lore, right? That's the idea that's positing this into this sort of object that has sort of very historically accurate occult references with, I think it's pretty safe to say that it was a druidic, that Chanctonbury was used in druidic times. But there's certainly no historical evidence to suggest that there's been a coven that's met there for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I've been doing it for what? 40 years, I suppose, now. 40, 45 years.
Did you have an experience or anything yourself?
Well, personally affecting me, we've done one or two paranormal investigations. I've had things like kitchen knives thrown at me. We've been witnessing, unfortunately, again, never photographed, is it? But that sort of thing, yes. The levitation up here, of course. Ghostly images at places like Bramber Castle, and various other bits and pieces, even at home where I live. I've always had that sort of thing going on, or been able to feel it. I'm not going to say as a medium or a psychic or anything, no, but it's just perhaps I'm a little bit more open to it, more open to it than some people. Hello, yes, so I'm Charles Walker, and we're up here at Chanctonbury Ring near Washington in Sussex, and I'm up here with a small team, paranormal investigations. We come up and check the site out because there's been a lot of strange events, paranormal and UFO going on up here. We were just doing a walk round in general. We came actually from the other direction towards this way, and he got to about here and whoosh, that was it. And then he appeared to be having a conversation, or something was having a conversation with him, and he was giving the answers back.
God.
I mean, we concluded from the audio that he was being told not to come back again or something, or not to do something.
No more. No more. Yeah. Tonight. 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 Just tonight, no more then. Please, no more. Honest. I won't come anymore. Stop.
Now at that point, at that last point with the screen there, by that time he was on the ground. And you've seen what the flints are like in there. And he fell on a couple of those. So the next morning, of course, we went to round to see him, and he was severely bruised. But he said, "That's it. I don't want to know anymore. I'm not going up there anymore. Don't want anything to do with it."
How high was he levitated off the ground?
Eye level. On his back. So, I mean, it's sort of like you're walking along here and you might slip on something, and your feet go out like that. But instead of going out and down, he went out and up. And then he went down shortly after that. But it sounded like, I mean, you can hear from there, it sounded like it's sort of almost being tortured.
Yeah.
It's like torture. I mean, you couldn't make that up if you tried.
No.
When you pass away, when you die, there is a spirit. And I believe that there is a spirit that separates. Now, whether you come back and haunt a place may well depend, and I think it does depend on how you die. If it's a sudden death that you weren't expecting, which is often the case with haunted houses, that person doesn't want to, that spirit doesn't want to let go. That person still thinks they are alive and it's their property and they should still be there. Up here, in places like this, well, as I say, there was a temple before, so there's no reason why there shouldn't be hauntings up here. There was probably sacrifices going on up here, way back when. So, yes, I believe that it is spirits. It is spirits.
Morning.
We've just got a brand new arrival here. Do you think that's an omen?
It just happened, did it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all the others have cleared off, but she's had to stay here because it's not in his feet yet.
Wow.
Amazing.
Did you see that happen?
Nearly. She was lying there when I got here, and the next minute there were two of them. But didn't actually see the event.
Amazing.
That one, there's another one just
Yeah,
there.
somebody says another one down there.
But I think there might be one over there that's not moving.
Yeah.
Because there's no mum near it, and it's a little heap.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it is.
Oh my God, I'm being blown over.
Be nice to have a bit of company again for a while, won't it?
Yeah. I know, a bit sick of you really.
Oh, don't be like that.
Is it? But there's knows to be a lot more people around here as well, aren't there? Like most of the downs have been really quiet.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the weekend now, isn't it? And the I suppose Brighton's just down the way. Devil's Dyke. Oh yeah.
Hey. Yeah, and like pretty big.
You said hello to those people, Louis.
What are you talking about?
I always say hello to you. Didn't say hello to anyone the other day. Scouring yours.
I wasn't. It's my painful leg. Yeah, they were
that
going
was
something.
the necessity principle, wasn't it?
Yeah, but that's kind of been going for, I don't know, they've been trying to use the defence of necessity as a defence to murder for about 120 years now.
Oh, really?
And it's
sit down and have a bit of a rest. And
that was quite steep, actually.
Yeah, it was surprisingly.
So, essentially, if you encourage or assist someone else's suicide, you can be liable for up to 14 years imprisonment. So it's a pretty hefty maximum penalty. But the law isn't just written, in statute. So judges also make the law, and what we've seen, I guess, over the last 15 years since the passage of the Human Rights Act in 1998 is legal challenges to the operation of the Suicide Act. And I think that the most important recent one, which has resulted in, I think, in a change in the legal regime on assisting suicide, was the case of Debbie Purdy in 2009. And this lady has multiple sclerosis, and she pointed out that a number of people over the years have been going to Switzerland, have been going to Dignitas to receive an assisted suicide. And these people's loved ones were not being prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Service. And so she essentially wanted to know what the basis of the Director of Public Prosecution's decisions not to prosecute were, or what the basis was. And so she used human rights legislation and particularly the right, which is Article 8, which is a right that's been carved out, that you now have this negative right, so a right to decide when and how to die, she used this right to kind of challenge the Crown Prosecution Service practice, and to get them, or to ask the House of Lords to get the CPS to issue guidance about what are the kinds of cases that will be prosecuted and what will the kinds of cases be that won't be prosecuted. And she won, because the highest court in the land effectively decided that, you know, people, using human rights principles, people need to know, you know, what to do and how to regulate their conduct. So that, you know, they need to be able to access the relevant rules, and then on the basis of these rules, they need to be able to foresee that if they do one thing or another, whether, you know, there's going to be some kind of criminal consequences for them. And this, the kind of at the end of this process, in 2010, the Director of Public Prosecutions issued some guidance on the offence of encouraging or assisting suicide. And I'll just say a couple of very brief things there. It outlines the factors in favour of prosecution, the public interest factors in favour of prosecution, the public interest factors against prosecution. And in favour, the message is very clear. If you're a medical professional assisting someone's suicide, you are likely to be prosecuted. Whereas on the other hand, you know, if you're someone who's, you know, a close personal relation, who's acting out of compassion, then you're not, you know, it's unlikely. That's a factor against prosecution. And if the person who dies, you know, has kind of made what you would call, you know, a well-considered or a well-reasoned decision, it's voluntary, it's informed, you know, they have decisional capacity in the eyes of the law, then, you know, that's another thing that points against prosecution. So what we have, I think, you know, as far as the legal regime for assisted suicide in England and Wales, is a regime that, you know, favours amateur assistance only. And you know, if we want to kind of think about the deaths that people are asking for, people generally don't want to be assisted by amateurs. They would want, you know, quite a medicalised death, one that was, you know, involved them going out in the least amount of pain and suffering. And I guess the question we ask here is, well, it is true that, or the conclusion we might draw here is that it is true that it is amateur assistance only as far as what happens in England and Wales is. But if you can go to Switzerland with that amateur assistance and have help to die that's medical, then that perhaps provides a convenient way out for the law in this jurisdiction. I think I'll stop there if that's all right.
Absolutely,
Thanks,
yeah, that's great.
Right, okay, the reassuring blue arrow means we're going the right way.
Hit the road here, and yeah, this looks as sort of as good as anything. I mean, this is Saddlescombe here.
Most of the kind of the good stuff on you've made.
Yeah. I mean, there's no burial in the churchyards at all for medieval suicides.
No burial?
Well, you can't be buried in the consecrated ground if you're guilty of suicide. You can if you're an innocent suicide though, like if you're insane or trying to relieve like incurable pain. There is a problem though, it's normally for hygiene reasons. A body is normally buried on the same day that they die, like any body, not just a suicide. So it's difficult to push through the are they guilty or are they innocent verdict before that point. And also there are some cases, because when you pronounce a verdict, the person you're pronouncing on is supposed to be present. So there are cases of the body being in the courtroom and then which must have been a lovely sight, but yeah, and then so the family would normally go for bury it in the churchyard and hope that that is fine. But there are cases it has to be dug up and moved outside to a different burial place, like outside of the city walls or something, like in a ditch surrounding the city or something like that.
It's pretty steep. It is a bit steep, isn't it? That's hills for you. Right, this is a real test of my knee now.
So Sheila was in her early 50s, and I met her in Eastbourne I spent a couple of days with her at her home at a point in time when she was applying to end her life at Dignitas in Switzerland. And Sheila had quite a traumatic upbringing, but she'd managed to create a very successful career for herself as a businesswoman, serving sort of London's wealthy elite. It was a kind of rags to riches tale in that way, and she was very she prided herself on being very self-sufficient, having sort of escaped the constraint of her family life. She considers herself to be a self-made woman, and 8 years prior to meeting her, she unfortunately developed quite a rare skin disorder, which had a really bad sort of effect on her life. So she, the illness manifested itself with sores on her body, which were incredibly itchy, and she would sort of scratch herself, and then the sores would bleed, and then even scratching it didn't sort of relieve her pain. She said nobody could really live with the constant irritation, and she found herself in hospital quite a lot, sort of covered head to toe in bandages to try and prevent her from scratching. She had scars sort of all over her body from the effects of this illness, and she'd become immune also to the strongest steroids. And she'd really, she was very entrepreneurial, and she'd tried every avenue to try and find a cure or relief for her suffering. But after 8 years of living with it, she decided that she felt that Dignitas was her only option.
What's the thing about people needing a chaperone to go with them? What's the idea behind that? The requirement from Dignitas that you have someone with you.
I think it's so because the service they offer. You arrive in Zurich, and you meet with the doctor who is going to write the prescription, and she has to be convinced of your case, and then you meet with them again a couple of 2 or 3 days later, so you have to be in Zurich for a number of days, and you reiterate your claim again, and so this is for the doctor to be able to judge that your claim is persistent, your desire is not going away, you haven't changed your mind, and then they write you a prescription, and then you don't see the doctor again. So when the press talks about the Dignitas clinic, in fact it's not a clinic, it's a demedicalised process. So you go to a flat where there's Dignitas volunteers, and they offer you what they call the accompaniment, where they will get the prescription for you, and they'll mix up the cocktail or whatever, and then you lie down on the bed and you take it yourself, so it's by your own hands, hence assisted suicide rather than euthanasia. I guess the accompanier, the Dignitas accompanier, the Dignitas volunteer, doesn't want to be the only person in the room. Perhaps they want somebody to be there with the person. And this is another service that Fate runs, in a way, is that they offer, they used to anyway, where a Fate member will travel with a person who doesn't have anybody else, or isn't willing to tell anybody else that they're going to go, and they will travel with them and sit with them when they take the lethal cocktail.
you sit within a network of circumstances. All right, so what you have is you have a biography, you have experiences, you have values which you then evaluate those experiences with, and what these things lead you to is a repertoire of action, which means that at any point those circumstances, alongside your values and alongside your view of your experiences, will orient you to the world in a particular way. So you'll behave towards the world in a particular way which appears to you reasonable. Now what you can't ever know is quite where somebody sits in that nexus, nexus of circumstances, which is why you can't be deterministic about actually why somebody's killed themselves. But what you can say is that everybody's is different.
If you get a student sometimes in the halls that sort of, kill himself, and then sometimes you get this spate of, it sort of knocks on a little bit. That's happened a few times, isn't it?
Well, the most famous recent one, I think, was probably Bridgend.
Yeah.
And what they create great confusion for us because they're seen as suicide clusters. And then we have a great outpouring of sort of soul searching about why in this place, why at that time, why this particular group of people. And I think one element, and of course it's not the whole story, but one element has to be, if you're living in Bridgend and you're young and you're not feeling so good and this, that, and somebody who you know kills themselves, then that becomes something that happens here. And then if somebody else does it, that reaffirms that's something that happens here. And so it's not as simple as copying. It's not copying, it's to do with a kind of internalization of what would a person in my situation reasonably do? And as soon as suicide becomes reasonable, someone in my situation sees that as an option, which is credible. So weirdly, I suspect that the amplification effects that people were talking about were as much to do with being proximate to somebody socially and culturally and geographically. So also, I suppose, places like Beachy Head have got this massive suicide rate at Beachy Head because it's known as somewhere where you can complete a suicide, and that's it. Sorry, that might be it. I mean, there are bound to be a multitude of other factors, but that's one which I think is often downplayed, particularly when either people are talking rather romantically about suicide, or talking about iconicism, or talking about places drawing people to them, or whatever. Well, it seems to me the most obvious observation is that it's a long way up and you fall onto something very hard. I can't think of anything less romantic, actually. One of the most appalling things about suicide is how mundane and frequent and boring and depressing it is. So most of it goes completely unreported. No one cares if a 55-year-old bloke who hasn't got much of a family hangs himself.
What is the kind of standard explanation for the gender disparity with more men than women taking their own lives?
Men are more violent. So women, it's that cry for help thing, that's why it irritates me so much, that women are less likely to complete because they're less committed to killing themselves, all sorts of things, you know them. That the methods that men use tend to be more successful because they're more violent. Women have got more of an investment in staying alive because of things like nurturing, and men have less of an investment. I mean, crazy stuff it seems to me. But I say that many more men complete suicides than women, so something needs to be explained.
So 72 years ago, at roughly this spot, Virginia Woolf weighted her pockets with stones and drowned herself It was March 1941, and her body was found 3 weeks later, but in the interim, her intimates, her sister Vanessa Bell and her husband Leonard Wolfe, had no doubt that she had committed suicide. This is because there had been intimations of that several times in the course of her life, and I'll say more about her life later. At crises in her life, like in 1904, when her father, Leslie Stephen, died, she attempted to throw herself out of a window in her grief and distress. There was a breakdown, and again in 1913, she had married Leonard Wolfe the year before. She saw a psychiatrist, Sir Henry Head. He was very eminent. Incidentally, Henry James had seen him the year before, and, to quote James, sent him down into hell. And he suggested to Virginia Woolf that she should go into a sanatorium, which filled her with misery and resistance. She went home and took an overdose of Veronal and very nearly died. So there were these thoughts in her, and often in her work curiously connected with water. So it wasn't altogether surprising that she should have done this successfully in 1941. What I do think is very suggestive, and this is something the editor of her letters, Nigel Nicholson, suggested, was that she wasn't mad when she committed suicide. She feared madness. I mean, I do think that she was hearing voices. I mean, this is something she did experience. It was when she was threatened with mental disturbance, she would hear the voices, sometimes the voices of the dead. Sometimes they would tell her to do unspecified things, but that she didn't want to do. But she was very close to the dead, and she, I don't think she lived with the dead in the way most of us do. I mean, we all have people we've been attached to who have died, and who've meant a lot to us. I think that she almost, this is a guess, I can't prove it, but she wrote about them so much in her diary, sometimes on their anniversary, especially the anniversary of her mother's death in 1895, that almost as though they were so close, they were with her, and she wouldn't mind joining them. That she suggests in the manuscript of Mrs. Dalloway that where she does deal with a suicide, a shell-shocked war veteran, Septimus Warren Smith, who throws himself out of a window when his doctors suggest that he should go into a sanatorium. He doesn't feel mentally ill at that moment, but he feels people are coming to get him, and it's almost as though he's driven out of that window. But in his previous ruminations, there's material in the manuscript. I was going to quote it to you, but it seems not the place to be sort of turning over pages. But as though I'm going to find it hard to put it into plausible words, because she always writes so sensitively and suggestively, poetically, that he didn't think of death as cataclysmic or horrible, but as a moving through some green shade into some opposite bank, and that he and Mrs. Dalloway feel that death is not final, that some spirit of the person remains attached to other people or places after their death. So we may feel this as we walk on Virginia Woolf's Downs, that she is in some way, she would have wished to feel that she was in some way, her spirit was still attached to her very strong sense of place.
So down there's a good place to get started and introduce something.
Great.
Yeah, how you alright with the audio? All
Yeah,
good?
fine. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, like a friend who's a geography academic, and it's like whenever she's talking about what she does, I just think that's psychology.
Is that a black swan over there?
I think it is, yeah.
Wow. Oh wow, it's being attacked.
There it is, isn't it? Chased off.
The whole theory
This one, it's got white.
The black swan.
You know the black swan theory?
with white
Do you know
trim.
about
Is it economics?
No. It's about how when we see things, because when the first time people saw black swans, they were European. Well, the first Europeans to see black swans, they had no context or framework for them. But it's, I mean, I don't know the nuance of it, but the entire detail. But it's basically how when we see unusual things, how we then build that into our understanding of the world. So it's our accommodation of the unusual.
Smugglers used to do is they used to lay, so they could see at night, the police would have white stones along the paths they could see.
Okay.
And the smugglers would move the paths so they'd go off the cliffs.
Yes.
Nice story.
Do something.
Yeah.
But I think also there's something about perspective on walks like this that, like for me personally, or if a friend is struggling, I quite often think that coming out somewhere like this, it just literally helps you to see the world as a bit of a bigger place.
Yeah.
There's enough space to contain whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Well, also I think it's been recognised, isn't it? Actually, behaviour. We've got a therapy called behavioural activation now.
And what's that? Walking?
Which is about getting people from depression. Well, the single most important thing somebody can do is get up and move.
Exactly. Yeah, because I think
There's always one of these here.
this is a new thing. They've started doing this.
Oh, really?
I think this is some sort of memorial. These stone
really?
circles. I've been noticing them.
Oh, is that a stone circle? That's not in the chalk.
No. People are actually making them, and I think there's a star. You see there's a star? I think that's a new thing to mark the spot. So apparently the suicides have been drifting up this side because this side has been so strong.
The feature had some more recent phenomena, isn't it?
No,
It's kind of, is it?
it's
isn't
been
it?
going from the 1600s.
Has it? Oh, okay. I didn't.
But suicide's not been recorded since the 60s, so they actually wouldn't document death as
Okay.
suicide until the 60s. So it's a new term,
Yeah.
suicide. So because of religion,
Yeah.
etc., they would just say accidental death, in all the records.
Okay.
So it's a pretty sort of modern phenomenon. Really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think coroners now are increasingly using narrative verdicts. And I think that sort of partly comes because you've got this group, you've got some people who intend to kill themselves but actually fail. You've got some people who don't intend to kill themselves and actually do. And then you've got a whole group who are incredibly ambivalent or kind of playing a bit of a Russian roulette.
What a place to have a house.
That would be amazing. That's like, wow.
Or you'd lose it quite soon, wouldn't you?
There is the boathouse up at Burling Gap, and they've just moved that back as well, but it's really close to the edge.
How fast are they eroding?
It's pretty fat. Apparently it's about 6 metres a year, I think, roughly.
That's
The
a lot.
landscape's quite a lot.
That is really a lot.
Where's that? Okay. My name's Michelle. I think I've spoken to quite a few of you already. I've been a Samaritan volunteer in Brighton for the last 5 years. And as part of today, I wanted to talk a bit about Samaritans and what the Samaritans do and how they try to support people with their suicidal feelings and how we sort of interact with those people and try to give them access to what we do. So Samaritans sort of has some core beliefs in the way that it tries to work with people. We're non-judgmental, and we don't offer advice at all. We're just there as listeners. We call ourselves listeners, and we listen to the people who want to talk about how they're feeling. And some of the other aspects that we do is that we try to just be another human voice. We're not professionals. There's 12,000 volunteers throughout the UK who are Samaritans listeners, and what we try to do is to just be a pair of ears and a voice at the end of the phone to allow people to talk about things that they feel they can't talk about anywhere else. And we try to create a space that allows conversations that people don't have in their day-to-day lives. And one of the core things that we do in the sort of our passivity, if that's the right way of doing it, is that we allow people to make the choice to end their life. So if people have chosen to end their life, and we support that, and we support that decision, and we allow people to talk to us. Sometimes when people have taken overdoses or are in the process of ending their life, they will speak to us, and we will stay with them, and we will support them, possibly to the point at which they are no longer with us. So it's an incredibly privileged moment of people's lives that they choose to contact us, and obviously we take that very seriously, with the respect that we feel it deserves, that we allow people to be in that place, and we try to support them and respect their wishes. Every part of you is crying out for something different to happen, and we want, our core value is to reduce death by suicide. That's what we want to do, but we feel that the way that we do it is by supporting people's choices and respecting who they are and the decisions that they've made in their life. It is getting bleaker and bleaker as we go along.
I know, it's a bit cliche.
It was so sunny when we started. It's a real
sort of
spring
Wuthering Heights
day.
now, isn't it, really? It's a little bit... Have you looked back along the coast? It's really amazing.
God. Very dramatic. Well, you can't really see. You can just see Cookmere. Lovely. And the sort of drizzle is the sort of like deep setting drizzle.
We're nearing the end of this suicide walk. 100 miles, 3 weeks, 25 hills, a trail of conversation as winding and as long as the ooze itself, and too many steps for me to count, too many thoughts for me to capture on this page. And there's one reason why we're all standing here today that's drawn each of us for our own private and not so private reasons. A subject that provokes questions about what it means to live and what it means to die. How do we approach the subject of suicide without romanticising it, trivialising it, without ourselves falling into some kind of despair? Can we walk this final stretch of coastline, holding the beauty, the power of the place, and also perhaps the sadness? We're all living and we're all dying. Sad but true. We see death as the counterpoint that makes life burn brighter. Can walking get us in touch with this fire? Cellophane wrappings of flowers flap in the breeze on top of Beachy Head. You will see the white crosses. It never fails to shock. But this coast is also haunted by the souls of dead sailors, their ships dashed across the rocks below. For centuries those ships sailed in darkness, once broken up across the shore like biscuits. They've since been reclaimed by this landscape, either swept out to sea or dissolved into the chalk on which we all now stand.
Someone prepared a buffet for us at the end.
It is. mate.
I think that's my mum.
It's my mum.
Yeah.
She's bursted into a sprint.
Oh no way, I was joking.
Yeah, no, it is.
As we walk up to Beachy Head, we might think of those sailors. We might see fulmars overhead. We might hear skylarks. We might peer down at a vast and distant sea. After all, we're only a few metres from the edge. The drop really isn't that far away.
Do you pump them in?
We've had experts and academics, healers and artists, interviews, therapy sessions and a bit of UFO spotting. 10 cup of soups, 20 blisters, a bad knee, 13 magic circles, 2 lighthouses, 1 dead literary giant. We're reaching the end, or rather a completion, the closing of a circle. We're also arriving. An arrival brings with it excitement, a sense of possibility, life. For Nathan and Louis, it's the climax of an intense journey, and the people they'll be when they get home isn't the same as the ones who left. The journey changes us.
Brilliant.
Now get them milk. Milk is here.
I'm going to have a little sandwich. What do you want me to do? Take the leaf.
You want, lovey?
Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1. As I was walking one morning at ease, viewing the leaves as they fell from the trees, they were in motion, appearing to be those that were withered, they fell from the tree. What's the life of a man? No more than a leaf. A man has his season, so why should he grieve? Though in this wide world he seems fine and gay, like a leaf he shall wither and soon fade away. You should have seen the leaves but a short time ago. They were in motion, appearing to grow. The frost came and bit them and withered them all. The storm came upon them, and down they did fall. What's the life of a man? Any more than a leaf. A man has his season, so why should he grieve? Though in this wide world he seems fine and gay, like a leaf he shall wither